What does breathing poorly look like? Tell us.
Breathing poorly looks like holding your breath without even really knowing that you're holding your breath because you're responding to the world around you and it's triggering you to brace yourself. Doing it poorly is also holding all the breath in the air in the chest. When there's only movement in the chest and not much movement in the belly and the diaphragm, you're doing what's called a stress breath, where we hold everything in the chest, the muscles of the neck and the chest and the shoulders get very tight. And I think that happens to a lot of us. We hold our stress up here. But when we can breathe down into the belly and allow the diaphragm to move, it allows us to take a deeper breath and utilize all the different mechanisms of breath. And it helps us to self regulate.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I'm so excited to bring you this riveting conversation with my new pal, Stephen Washington. He is the author of this beautiful book, Recovering You, Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction, which I'm always interested in. So, besides being the author of the book, he's a former professional dancer who performed on Broadway in The Lion King, and movement has inspired a lot of his recovery. He does Qigong. He is also a well-known Pilates teacher. But his life and the way that his energy is, I actually visited Stephen and his husband, Lee Harris, who's a friend of mine, when I was out in LA recently. And I just loved his energy so much. He really does live a joyful life of recovery and is so passionate about helping others and basically shares his story of, being in a family where everyone was addicted to something. And, getting into recovery wasn't exactly considered like the coolest thing in the world. And being a black man in America ain't easy. And being a gay black man in America really ain't easy. So really just vulnerably shared his entire story in this interview. But there's so much hope that he provides in this book and so many very accessible, great ideas of ways that you can take better care of yourself right now, whether you are in recovery or not. So I don't think this book is only for folks in recovery. I feel like anyone can gain something from this book from my pal, Stephen Washington. So I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I enjoyed doing it. Well, hello there. I am super excited to welcome my pal, Stephen Washington, to the Terri Cole Show. Hi, Stephen. Welcome.
Hi, Terry. So good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we actually just had an adventure when I was in California. It was so much fun
Of
where I
course.
went up to see you and your husband or your partner, Lee's house. And where you guys are set up, it looks like heaven. Do you ever, heaven, like what heaven could look like? I feel like my house is a little bit like heaven.
hmm
But those views, wow. Do you love it there?
I do. I do. It's something that brings me a lot of peace just to look out the window and see mountains and see hawks flying through the sky and it's beautiful. Yeah.
Indeed. All right, I'm super excited about your book, Recovering You, Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction. I was talking about this with the folks at the top, but I want to just ask you what inspired you to write this book?
Well, what inspired me to write Recovering You was just the desire to share what's helped me in my recovery over the last 20 years. I think a lot of the practices and a lot of the tips that I give in the book are things that were so freely given to me by my sponsor, by therapists over the years. But a lot of the practices that I share in the book didn't come into my life until 10 years into recovery when I was in this crisis point and I was so fearful of relapse that I was able to grab hold of these tools that were given to me, like the Qigong and the self massage and the deep breathing, and it was transformative. And so I knew from that moment on that I was going to use those practices for myself for the rest of my life, but I knew that I really wanted to share them with other people. And so that is at the heart of Recovering You.
What's so amazing about this book and about what you're sharing is that when I'm also someone who struggled with addiction throughout my life, I'm in my own version of recovery, whatever that is, but there's something about the pain and how scary it is when you're such an effective human being in other ways that addiction is not about willpower, right? It's really not. And the fear, it just like struck me when you were saying the fear of relapse and how that's a real thing for anyone who has struggled with addiction. And it's so mind blowing, as you share in the book, when it's you, when you find things that actually help, right?
Mhm. hmm Absolutely. When I think back to all my time in active addiction, honestly, for a long time, the things that I turned to were my solution. Like they helped me to be in the world and it helped me at that time. And part of me is grateful for that, but eventually it stopped working and it became incredibly self-destructive and I really found myself at a turning point where I was going to either keep on doing the same thing over and over again and maybe expecting different results, and those results could have been jails, institution, or death, or I could try something new that would be more life enhancing and more fulfilling. So I'm glad I
Right.
made that other choice.
Yeah, me too. You talk about recovery from addiction as a return to self. Can you say more about that? Because that also really resonated with me in my own experience.
Yeah, I feel as though when I entered recovery, I was able to find parts of myself that I had lost to my addiction and even discover things that I didn't quite know about myself. It was really a reconnection to myself, a reconnection to the world and other people. But I feel as though when we are in active addiction, it's a trade off. I felt like I could not do what I was doing when I was using and still hold on to the deepest parts of myself, the essence of myself. It was a trade off. And for a long time, I was willing to do that. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but hindsight is so clear that that's exactly what I was doing. And that's what I love about Recovering You. It helps people to recover the parts of themselves that they lost to addiction and discover things that they probably didn't even know about themselves and create a new life that's hopefully more joyous and more conscious.
It's amazing that framework that you just shared is sort of exactly what I experienced because I stopped drinking when I was young. I was in my early 20s. But I was so, I mean, listen, in my early 20s, of course, I didn't know who the hell I was anyway.
Right.
But I really didn't know because I had started numbing my feelings at such a young age that I couldn't believe how good it felt to not be hungover every day. I was like, wait a minute, life is just amazing. Flat out, just this change is amazing. But I started really, as exactly as you're saying, sort of discovering parts of myself that I had no idea, like the interest in things, because it takes a lot of bandwidth to be an active alcoholic or drug user. It takes time, planning,
Energy,
bandwidth, money,
all of it.
all the things. So
Yeah.
you've been sober from drugs and alcohol for over 20 years or for 20 years.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit about your recovery journey and like what is one of the most important things you learned about yourself along the way?
Yeah, my story is kind of simple in some ways. I come from a family where addiction was rampant. I think my immediate family and extended family all were dealing with trauma, didn't know that they were dealing with trauma, and they were dealing with it the best way that they could, and they turned to alcohol and drugs and cigarettes and sex and other stuff to get through. And so I learned that very early. I was a very sensitive child. And so being in a chaotic environment where my parents were in a very unhappy marriage was very difficult for me. You add just the challenges of being a young black man in America on top of that, and being gay and all that comes with that, and being in a family where I got messages that that wasn't acceptable.
Yep.
So you can imagine that when I had my first real drink at the age of 15, that I finally felt like I could breathe because it made me feel better in my body. It made me feel like I could be in the world with other people and I can communicate and be funny and just quiet all the noise in my head. So the amazing feeling I had from that first time, I chased that for the next 20 years or so. And and I did so for a long time without great consequence. And then around 1999, 2000, 2001 is where I turned that corner. I crossed that invisible line where there were greater and greater consequences to my actions. And that's the thing about addiction. You surrender to this thing that's outside of yourself, that's helping you cope despite negative consequences. I reached a point where I couldn't go any further with it, but I also couldn't imagine life without it. And I was so desperate. And the long of the short is that I had a friend who was sober, and he had been in recovery for a long time, and he just made sobriety look so good. When I had that realization, because really I feel as though you have to be so broken down in order for the light to come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he was that light. And so he took me to my first 12-step recovery meeting, and then the rest is history in terms of that. And over the last 20 years, it's been incredible to be sober because it's given me a second life. Of course, it's not a perfect life. I still have my challenges. I still have my fears. I still have had many things to contend with, but I will take this any day over what I had when I was in active addiction. Because, like you said earlier, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of bandwidth to manage all that.
My God, it does. It also, the thing that I recall for myself, that being active and doing things that I was unaware of, or I would black out, there was shame in my life in a way that once I got sober, there really wasn't. And that was such a relief to not sort of be my own worst enemy
Mm,
around situations, like just handling stuff badly and doing like mean things to others, just
yeah.
cheating, whatever the thing was. It was something that had I been sober, I never would have done it, right? And so that doesn't help the people that you're doing terrible things to, but you know that in your heart of hearts, and the relief of being like, yes, there's energy required to stay sober, and it's so worth it because I'm wide awake in my life.
Mhm.
So, the subtitle of the book is Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction. So, let's talk a little bit about what is soul care and why is it important?
How I understand soul care, and I think about it in this way, is soul care is anything that we do that benefits our body, our mind, and our spirit. And the book is filled with many different practices that tend to each aspect of ourselves. So anytime we devote energy to taking care of ourselves, it's soul care because it's all connected. It can't be
Right.
separated. The body mind connection, it's there, and everything in the book helps enhance that connection.
It's an interesting way of looking at it, though, because I think that a lot of times people don't think about self care as soul care, but I do see that as a real connection
Yeah.
to really deciding, like, what kind of life do you want to live? What I love about the book is that there's so many suggestions. There's so many very accessible practices that people can do. So you talk about mindful movement and how focusing on deep breathing can help us eliminate stagnation and release long held emotions and tension, right? This is part of what you talk about in the book. So
Mhm.
tell us more about how movement can facilitate healing.
Movement can facilitate healing, and from a Chinese medicine perspective, we're all energy, right? There are different manifestations of energy. There's the dense manifestation of energy, which is the body, and then the subtler energies, which are the emotions and the mind. And energy is designed to flow freely through the body. Now, when it doesn't flow freely through the body, we develop things like tension and pain and disease. When we think about the emotions, it can be turbulent emotions, things that we're having trouble processing. And then when we think about the mind, it's our thoughts. Like what are our thoughts like? Are they racing? Are they very chaotic and turbulent? And so movement, deep breathing has the ability to not only cultivate energy within your body, but also circulate the energy throughout the body. And one of the things that I found in my recovery for years was I was focusing so much on my mind and what I thought and what I believed, and also what I felt, but I didn't connect it to the body. And the body keeps score. It keeps score of everything that we experience, and it needs to be addressed and cared for. And so the mindful movement does that. And the deep breathing is just an extension of that, because when you're moving mindfully, you're not only paying attention to how your body is moving in the present moment, but you're also paying attention to how you're breathing. So many of us, I mean, we all breathe, we have to breathe in order to stay alive, but not many of us do it well.
Tell
Most
us
of us
what
hold our breath.
breathing, what does breathing poorly look like? Tell us.
Breathing poorly looks like holding your breath. Holding your breath without even really knowing that you're holding your breath, because you're responding to the world around you and it's triggering you to brace yourself. Doing it poorly is also holding all the breath in the air in the chest. When there's only movement in the chest and not much movement in the belly and the diaphragm,
Mm-hmm.
you're doing what's called a stress breath, where we hold everything in the chest, the muscles of the neck and the chest and the shoulders get very tight. And I think that happens to a lot of us. We hold our stress up here. But when we can breathe down into the belly and allow the diaphragm to move, it allows us to take a deeper breath and move and utilize all the different mechanisms of breath. And it helps us to self regulate and self
Yep.
soothe.
Yeah, it really does. But as you were talking, I could literally feel everything you mentioned. I was like, oh my God, I'm chest breathing. My neck is so tight. And I do meditate and do breathing stuff, but it's such a great reminder. And I know that something that was really profound for you from the book is Qigong. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
So each chapter of the book ends with a short Qigong exercise. And it's, we call it mindful movement exercise. So would you tell us a little bit about Qigong and what role it's played basically in your own recovery journey? Because I know it's been important.
Yes. So Qigong is an ancient Chinese healthcare system that combines flowing movement and standing postures, deep breathing, and focused intention to activate and cultivate and circulate life force energy. And energy is something that we all need and we could all use a little bit more of.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the word Qigong, Qi means energy and breath, and Gong means work or skill. So the practice of Qigong is a practice of learning how to become more skillful at managing your own energy. And Qigong entered my life at a time when I desperately needed it. I had begun graduate school for traditional Chinese medicine. I thought I wanted to be a Chinese medicine doctor, only to realize that that's not the path that I wanted to go on. And it caused me a great deal of stress. And I was having panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I was crying before class in my car, you name it. And I thought I was going to relapse during that period of time. And that was about 10 years sober. And one of the things that helped me move through that process was Qigong, because it was part of the curriculum. And it was an easy thing for me to grab hold of, because movement is always been my go-to ever since I was a kid. I was dancing around the living room, basically doing energy medicine on myself, but not even realizing that's what I was doing. But it helped me feel better in my body, in the world, in the moment. And so this practice of Qigong became that for me, because instantly I could feel it calming me down. I could feel that the anxiety that I was feeling and that tightness in my chest was starting to relax and release. And I could notice that my mind wasn't racing when I was doing Qigong. And I was able to regulate myself, which was a revelation to me. And so between what I was doing in class and I would practice at home in between, and it was just revelatory. And that gave me the insight that, okay, this is something that's going to help me for the rest of my life, and it's going to help me in my recovery. And this is something that could be really useful for everyone, but especially people who are dealing with addictions. Because I think, in my own experience, I turned to drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and food and all that stuff as a way to self-soothe and to self-regulate. And the practices, Qigong being one of them, is just another way to self-regulate and to self-soothe and give your body, your mind, and your heart space.
Well, and you really have, this is what has become your dharma and your work in life. Part of it now is you're a Qigong teacher, you're a Pilates teacher, very sought after and well known for what you're doing. So you really took this and brought it into like one of the driving purposes kind of your life is to share this with others. Do you have regular classes? How does that work with people who want to work with you, whether it's Qigong or Pilates or whatever else you teach?
I have a online membership community called SWE Studio. It's a program that I've created about 2 years ago where I offer 65-minute classes that combine Pilates and Qigong. I fuse them together and I also do a little meditation at the end. I also do laughter medicine and provide other practices for people to help them to become more skillful at managing their own energy and to just extend their self-care practices even further than what they already do. And it's been wonderful and it's been a joy. And when I think about SWE Studio, because I really wanted it to be something that was accessible and affordable for people, it is exactly that. I think of it as continuing education for what I offer in Recovering You. It's an extension of that. And I think they go really well hand in hand. It is my, like you said, my dharma to share this because I understand the language of the body. I understand what it's like to be disconnected from it. And it brings me joy to help people reconnect to those parts of themselves that they may have forgotten or disconnected from because of trauma or other circumstances. It's incredibly rewarding to do what I do.
And how is the community aspect? Because, you know, part of what, when you were talking about this, I was thinking about how recovery itself, people who do the 12 steps and go to the rooms and do their thing, it's like that community is life, you know. And so in your own, you've created your own community. And how important do you think that aspect is to successful recovery?
It's so important. I couldn't have gone into recovery by myself. I needed my friend initially to be that beacon of light for me and to pull me into this amazing community that has provided me with support and so much love and so much guidance. People need people. And there's so many studies that have been done about how having community and having meaningful relationships with others is beneficial for your mental health.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to create an opportunity for people to experience that through the pages of the book by sharing my story, also introducing them to friends of mine in recovery, share their stories, and just sort of wrap ourselves around the reader. SWE Studio is just an extension of that as well because it's such a beautiful group of people from all over the world, all ages. I have people in their 20s and I have people in the membership community who are in, I believe, in their late 70s.
Wow.
So it's remarkable, and I love how people are supporting one another and connecting with one another because we all need that and we all benefit from that.
It's so incredibly important, especially the beginning of the recovery journey and as we continue on too. But I feel like in the beginning, because so much of the time we've been in a shame spiral for a long time, or we've been feeling disconnected from our real selves, right? Because at least for me, because I was very high functioning, there was this, you know, the false self, which was just out there crushing it, doing all the things. And so the pain that I was in, you know, I wasn't like getting a DUI, right? Like people didn't know. People were in denial. When I said I was going to stop drinking, I mean, even my own mother was like, your therapist said you're an alcoholic. I mean, you might have a drinking problem, but I wouldn't say you're an alcoholic. I'm like, what's the fucking difference? Like,
That
would
sounds
it
like
make
my
you?
father.
I was like, okay, mom, whatever. I will. And I didn't actually talk to her again about it for another 9 months, where I finally was like, oh, hey, I haven't had a drink in 9 months. And she was like, well, amazing. Why didn't you tell me? I was like, I tried. You didn't want to know. So I just figured, I mean, it's a solo journey. Hence, again, back to why the community is so incredibly important. In the first chapter of the book, which is called Practicing Self Care During Recovery, you say, deep breathing, self massage, and meditation are essential practices for daily wellness. So, for you personally, how do you incorporate these practices like into your own daily life?
Well, when it comes to the practices that are in the book that I mentioned, they are woven throughout my day. I start off each day by just taking some deep breaths and also just reading some sort of recovery literature or something or a prayer. That's one thing that grounds me. I always have a movement practice at some point earlier in the day. That also helps to ground me and energize me. And throughout the day, I will employ self massage in some way. And I always end the day by massaging my feet. I have difficulty sleeping sometimes at night when my mind
Same.
is racing, and that's one of the things that helps to regulate me. So, those are my benchmarks throughout the day. And then I'll add on top of that depending upon what I need for the day. Sometimes my self care will include a 12-step meeting, sometimes it won't. Always connecting to my furry animals in our house. That is always a part of my self care because that just brings me so much joy, and I immediately drop into the present moment when I interact with them. Spending time in nature
Yep.
is also incredibly powerful, and also just connecting with people. I have my what I call my kitchen cabinet, just a handful of people that I touch base with on a regular basis, some in recovery, some out of recovery. Again, just having that community around me so that I can have people to turn to and share what's happening and also listen to them, because listening to them share what's happening in their lives helps me get out of myself too.
Right.
Yeah, and that's really important as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Those so many of those things I do in my own life. But I was just recording an episode on sort of getting joy from other people's joy. Like, we know it's called Schadenfreude, I
Schadenfreude.
think.
Hmm.
Yes, Schadenfreude. And how that's getting pleasure out of other people's pain. But I was like, okay, so that's a direction we've been going for a while. Maybe we could focus our attention on just amplifying other people's joy. And I find that for my own daily mental well being, that besides nature and movement and many of the things that you described, really celebrating. Like, I'm always saying to my friends, like, what are you proud of right now? Like, what went amazing this week, or what was great today?
Yeah.
Not as a hyper positivity weirdo or like bypassing anything, simply because someone else's win, I get to feel those good feelings for them too.
Mm.
You publishing this beautiful book, that gives me a great feeling. I love this book. So tell us, where can we get the book?
You can get the book by going to Amazon. It's on
Great.
sale at Amazon. You can buy it there. You can also get it on Audible. There's an audio version of the book as well.
Did you read it yourself or did someone else?
I read it myself.
Yes, you
I read
did.
it myself.
That was a lot, right?
I have, yes, it's quite an experience. I was like, wow, this is hard work. Sitting in this little booth for hours.
Indeed.
But I'm so glad I did. And it was really a dream come true because having a theater background, I always wanted to use my voice in that way. And I'm so happy that I was able to create an opportunity for me to do something like that and create the audiobook. So you can also find access or find links to get the book on my website, stephenwashingtonexperience.com. And you can also find it in some of your local bookstores as well.
Excellent. You guys, the book is Recovering You, Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction by my pal Stephen Washington. There's the cover. It might look backwards, but there it is. It looks amazing. Go get this book. It will inspire you to have much, much better self-care, whether you are in recovery or not. Thank you so much, Stephen, for being here. I super appreciate you. Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, thank you so much, Terry. Have a good day.
You too, hon.